Okay, I'm ready. So the last of the day, I'm going to say a thank you to Mark Ye, who is a CEO for Agile PT, and right in the back. So he's given me. He's one of the founders of this company, Agile. This company that I'm working with right now, that's called Appear on Light. And so Mark and two of his colleagues are founders, and he's allowed my name to come forward. And Amy, congratulations for pinning me down and also organizing this whole day and tomorrow as well. Your speaker lineup is phenomenal. Like, it really is amazing. I don't know how big the event is, but I've certainly been at very large events overseas within Australia around cycling, and I think your lineup is just, it's you really got a good group. I don't know how widely known people know that, but you've got a phenomenal group here. What I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk about two themes, and they're going to go back to back. So we'll do a little, let you get up and move around and stretch a bit. The first theme is going to be, actually, can I start with the other one first? Yeah. So we've got, this is a teaser so that you stay interested. We're going to end with some comments on belief effect. And people will think of that like a placebo effect, but we'll go a little bit broader than just like, ooh, if I take a sugar pill and believe in it, what does it do to me? We'll talk about kind of like, national belief effects and institutional belief effects and coach belief effects. And then what we're going to start with is a little bit of a look at, yeah, so let's go, yep, that one. And we can go right back to the very beginning. And while it's a really nice kind of juxtaposition that while Christine was saying, oh, I'm pretty good at cycling, there's this country down in Australia, very small country, 25 million people, about like New York City and the adjacent areas in the landmass of the US. And they're trying to figure out, how are we going to be competitive in men's and women's cycling? How are we going to do it? It's just such a, it's just such a small country. And so in Australia, they think a lot like, it's just not going to happen in Australia. There's no rationale or justification. How are you going to have men or women who are going to compete against some of the best in the world if you don't have a plan? You've got to have a plan. You got to have a strategy, because it's just too small. Maybe China, just get everybody riding. Someone good will pop out, but that's not gonna happen in Australia. There's just not enough people. So yeah, if you just go to the beginning. Yeah, you're on kind of the last one. Christine was there. That was a bizarre road race.
Not as bizarre as this summer.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That one was a bizarre road race. Perfect. So the AIS is the Australian Institute of Sport. I'm going to take you on a little bit of we'll do a little bit of a ride up to me getting to the Australian Institute of Sport and what we did there in the lead up to a couple different Olympic Games from a cycling perspective. But I'm going to start by talking about kind of the sports science support ideas and themes. And then we're going to talk about a very specific project that happened after a very specific event. And it's a bit of a broader sports science project. It's not just like, do cooling jackets work? It's like it's a larger thematic project that I'll tell you about. So let's go ahead. And I've been watching everybody with the keys to see how long it takes for something to jump. Okay. If I hit that, then we will just take a little look and see. Oh, there we go. Let's see where we got up to. That's all right. We jumped a couple. That's all right. This is perfect. This is a great starting point. So, so I'm originally from Oregon, grew up in Bend, Oregon, not too far away. I was a skier, a downhill skier. And there's a small little school that gives out scholarships to skiers in Idaho called College of Idaho, outside of Boise. So I went there, was still loving my skiing, but ended up getting more interested in cross-country skiing than downhill. I actually did both, and I was doing better in cross-country skiing than downhill. So there is a graduate program up in northern Michigan, and you could do the Central Marathon Series and study exercise physiology, and it seemed perfect for me. I was probably doing more skiing than studying. but I did a project on the anaerobic threshold and the Conconi threshold and how things couple and uncouple. And I presented my data and I ran into some of the scientists from the US Olympic Training Center. And they said, hey, have you ever thought about coming to Colorado Springs? We have these research assistantships. And I said, oh, that'd be really exciting. I love sport. That'd be really cool. So I went ahead and applied. And from 88 to 89, I was at the Olympic Training Center. Interesting time in cycling. So this is when Lance is a young little junior. They're having junior camps through the Olympic Training Center. Chris Carmichael is a very big presence and a very agitating presence. So there's lots of politics going on, very exciting. And so there was interest in funding both for the juniors, but also the seniors. And these guys were bringing in power meters, SRMs. And I had heard of power meters, but I'd never really seen them. And they, at the Olympic Training Center, they had a whole box full of them, literally. So we were super excited about getting not just heart rate, but power. After spending a couple of years there working with skiers and cyclists, I had a chance to do some doctoral studies up at the University of Wyoming. And the theme that was really interesting me was how can people train really, really hard? Christine said I was never overtrained. I was really interested in how tired can you get, release the load, and have something magical happen where you come out stronger versus when you load really, really hard and you release the load, a taper or a couple days off, and nothing happens. And what the difference between just curling up in a fetal position and weathering the storm, just tolerating abuse versus, thriving and adapting and growing. So we were doing all these titration studies where you would load people up for 4 to 6 weeks or load them up for 2 to 3 months. Look at heart rate variability, cortisol, catecholamines, testosterone, all these markers of like stress. And then unload people and see if you could predict who would just be flat and say, thanks for that study, what a waste of time, and who would just come up and be amazing. But what happened at the University of Wyoming is I got to take over, they had a collegiate cycling program. So I became like the DS for this program. And within that program, there were 2 really interesting people. I would use the club for my research subjects. And I got a couple of grants at the Olympic Training Center so I could do some of my studies on some of the pursuit cyclists down there, some of the track cyclists, as well as some of the collegiate cyclists. And there were 2 individuals, one of them, and they were students in an exercise physiology class I was taking. And I was told, you can ask them if you know them, whether this is true, that they took exercise physiology with me because the guy that normally taught it was he was a hard ass, and it was a tougher class. And these guys wanted it easy. So they thought a graduate student teaching this year, because he's on sabbatical, will take it. One was Jim Miller. So he was one of my students, and the other was Dean Golich. And I tell them to their face, they were not spectacular students at all, like on the other end of the continuum, but they were unbelievable with their enthusiasm and pretty decent cyclists at the time as well. So for a lot of my time at University of Wyoming, I was tightly tied in with the Olympic Training Center. And we were doing studies on looking at, TRIMPs and training impulse and load and tapers and all these empirical models of trying to predict fatigue and fitness and how the 2 wax and wane. A lot of the early ideas that led to some of the work Andy Coggin was doing that eventually became adopted into Training Peaks. So it was all kind of before Training Peaks. Well, after I finished at the University of Wyoming, I ended up going to the Australian Institute of Sport. And when you're doing your PhD work, you're going to conferences and presenting papers, I kept running into these Australian sports scientists that seemed to be very similarly aligned with some of these themes of altitude training, heat, thermoregulation, fatigue, and all these different iterations. When I finished, this one guy, Alan Hani, told me, he said, we're going to have a project going on in the lead up to the Olympics in '96. We're going to do some altitude training in Colorado. Colorado, what if you work in with our team? So it was a 2-year contract. I got to go to Australia. I was recently married. And I thought, this is just going to be wonderful. I'm going to see Australia. The Institute of Sport is a long way from the Great Barrier Reef. I found out after I kind of got there. But the idea was this was going to be fun and exciting. And what would happen at the Australian Institute of Sport, big group, 120 scientists, medical doctors, postdocs, PhDs, students. It's a big group. I was used to the Olympic Training Center. with, you know, 2, 3 of us. Hey, Randy Wilbur, who's another guy I hired, which is amazing. He's still there, which is great. And it was a small little group. There'd be like maybe 6 of us. I walked in over there and they'd have these big all staff meetings, you know, with 120, and everyone was doing projects. It'd be akin to like a community college compared to like Stanford. It just seemed unbelievable to me. And then they would take thematically something that was important for, say, the Olympic Games in '96, heat, and say, what can we do about it? So I got on 2 projects. One was a project just looking at thermal capacity, like how much heat can your body basically absorb or accumulate before you start to show dysfunction and you can't perform at the same level. And that was also very tightly tied into a cooling jacket project. This is way before the Nike cooling jackets were ever out there. There were different types. We used a neoprene jacket to insulate the coldness from the outside. And it was literally filled up with ice. And it was then packaged on different parts of the body. We also were looking at ways to hyperhydrate with like glycerin BP or different types of agents that would trap and hold water in the body. And these were themes that we would then start with like a research group with. If it looked promising, it would move to like collegiate, you know, kind of level cyclists. And if it was really good, we'd go to the national team. And if it was really good, it would make its way into the Olympic athletes, which is really exciting. So when I went to '96, in the lead up to '96, we found out that the next Olympic Games are going to be in Sydney, Australia. And so why leave, right? So now the Olympics are in Sydney, but it's not going to be hot in Sydney. It's more temperate, cool conditions. And so we got to sit down in a bunch of different focus groups and study groups. And the idea was, in Finland, they built an altitude house with nitrogen dilution, and they could create hypoxia. And so the idea was, let's move hard on altitude. And so basically a hotel was built right at the Australian Institute of Sport, and I was involved with the altitude house project. Now, the interesting thing about the altitude house project is some of the early studies were looking at this erythropoietic cascade, how you naturally produce EPO, and then how reticulocytes and hemoglobin mass change in response to different altitudes. And as a comparison, we were looking at research that was coming out of clinical studies, looking at what happens when you inject EPO. And it was Alan Hahn, who I was working with, who sat down one afternoon and said, I've been thinking about stuff. He was a really clever guy. And he said, when you inject EPO, that like many endocrine systems, you completely disrupt it. And it's super easy to tell if someone's injected EPO or not. Now, a lot of people are going after trying to pee and see if you had some type of exogenous source of erythropoietin, which is tricky to do. It can be done. But what Alan was talking about was these kind of multivariate models, which just say, what's your normal EPO, the hormone? What are your reticulocytes, your new red blood cells? What's your ferritin levels, your iron stores? What's your soluble transferrin receptor like? And just look at them in ratios. And if the ratios hold together, that's normal physiology. And if you've got something out here, it's indirect, that looks completely abnormal, either you're taking EPO or you got a tumor or something, like it's not normal. So a indirect test was launched right before the Olympic Games in Sydney. And guess what happened? A whole bunch of countries stayed home. It was bizarre. And Australia's medal count moved up. In sports like kayak, there were teams and countries that just didn't come. And so it was really interesting. There were some athletes that came and they tested them, and it was all supposed to be super confidential. But if you watch the road race, or if you're really up on some of the endurance sports, there were people that were called out. And it was essentially, they couldn't do anything about it because it was not enforced, an enforceable rule. It was more of like surveillance. But you could tell that there were individuals that had really bizarre hematological profiles while they were competing at the Olympic Games. So after Sydney, the cycling results were not as good as we had hoped. And there was an opportunity for me to take on a role of the National Sports Science Coordination role. That's an interesting role in Australia because what you get to do is there's all these state institutes, And you get to work with all those scientists as well as the AIS is like the Pentagon. It's like the central source of scientists. And you get to work with all of these scientists to think about roadmaps on what you're going to study and what you're going to do. So I decided to take that role on and stay in Australia. So one of the themes that happened in the lead up to Athens, it was another hot Olympic Games, so there was a lot of thermoregulation stuff, but sleep and recovery became a really big deal. And we hired a scientist named Shona Holson, who publishes a lot in this area, and we've collaborated on a lot of research projects. And it started to become, compression and hydrotherapy and what things that you could do before you go to bed to try to enhance recovery. And you said it so well, Christine, like, are you overtired or just under recovered? Do you stay up all night looking at Twitter or do you go to bed? And it makes a big difference. So we started to do different studies on how to use different recovery modalities. And this will come up in the next talk. What we started to find really interesting is that when people feel like they're engaging in things that make them recover, they feel more recovered, no matter what you do, which is probably the source of a lot of great products that are out there on the market. If you look the part and wave your hand and you say you're recovered, fatigue is a very elusive thing. And when you say, I feel tired, you feel tired. When I would go on grand tours, there was one cycling coach that I worked with, Shane Bannon. We talked about this. He said, you know what? We're never saying the F word again. No more fatigue on tour. You'll never ask anyone if they're tired. Of course you're tired. You're doing a lap around France. So let's just say, how are you coping? Coping is fine. I'm not coping, I am coping, but let's get away from fatigue. Because once we drill on it and focus on it and measure it and graph it, we've got it. And we don't want it. So I thought that was a really interesting part of the lead up to 2004. I was actually in the car behind a Noni Wood looking at all the splits. We were like, damn it, where's that Christine? She's close, she's close. She's probably got the medal. I was like, oh shit, in the Noni. It was 1.5 seconds she beat a Noni. And both of you were just whiskers away from the big medals. Didi DeMette was actually a junior cyclist when I was at the Olympic Training Center. So I felt really good for her, but I kind of was hoping Noni would have beat them both, but she didn't. So let's go to the next one. This is now the lead up to Beijing. In the lead up to Beijing, that course was fast. What Christine told you about that descent where you took your pull and you kept it all together, you weren't going like, 25 miles an hour. Like it was screaming fast. I don't know what peak speed you guys were hitting, but we knew that particularly on that course and in a number of different areas, the aerodynamics and the bike position was going to just be king. And so there became, there's a group at Monash, they have the largest wind tunnel in the Southern Hemisphere. And we had these air-bearing systems. We actually could put a full pursuit team, each on their individual air-bearing system, all in different orders, and look at different drafting effects behind people, but also individually. And the wind tunnel program had a lot of aerospace engineers. And one thing that came out of this work, which was really interesting, is they started to, it was a guy, Timothy Couch, great, aerodynamicist. He was basically in a project called Aerotwin. You've probably seen a couple countries have gone this way. You scan the athlete and you make a mannequin, and then you scan the athlete on a bike and you reposition the mannequin to look like the person. So I could scan Christine, make a mannequin that looks like her shape, and then she can go ride, go back and save lives. But what we could do is get a group to sit in the wind tunnel for weeks, repositioning the mannequin to find positions that look really good. Then you could come back on a Sunday and we could say, we think these are really cool positions. Why don't you try to adopt them? The problem is sometimes you get in those positions and you can't see, or you can't breathe. And both of those are problematic for cycling. And so the trick is to find the optimization. But the other thing that came out of this I thought was super interesting is everybody that left the wind tunnel would say, wow, I can't wait for the next time trial. I'm gonna be so fast. And how much they started to believe that they were gonna be faster. Now, if you really get into the aerodynamics, wind never hits you laminar and right in your face. It's usually coming from the side and it's messy. There's cars, there's bikes, that bike came up on you and filmed you. They're doing all kinds of stuff to your wake flow and to the resistance. And so the correlations are not super clean or clear, but people still believe. They still believe that I might have it. I might have an advantage. And what started happening with wind tunnel testing, I thought, was fear of missing out. If you didn't go to a wind tunnel, everybody's like, "Oh, you haven't been to a wind tunnel? Shoot, you're not going to win anything around here." Like it was almost like it would go the other way, which was really interesting. I put this little picture of a skeleton athlete in there. Once we started taking cyclists in, the program opened up for a whole variety of high speed movement athletes. And we actually tried a project where we grabbed about 30 women who had never seen snow, and we trained them up, did a talent ID study, and got Australians to try the downhill sliding sport head first of skeleton. We had one girl who hadn't seen snow, and in 3 months, she was a junior world champion. It was like the Jamaican bobsled thing. They did not have an Australian anthem. They did not have an Australian flag. She just stood there, and they played the Canadian song. They said, "It's Commonwealth. That should be close enough." Yeah. So the wind tunnel was a really fun project. You can read about it in that paper, and there's a little movie that was made up on it that was kind of fun. So then, yeah.
Quick comment on the wind tunnel, I totally agree. I think it's very overrated. So the other testing I did was with SRM in Germany.
Yeah, Bootkin. We were talking. Billy was talking about Bootkin. Yeah.
Speed, and then change your position, and you measure it out.
Yeah, it's much better. I like that.
If you can tag team,
yeah,
do both,
yeah.
then it's
The part spent a lot of time at Bootkin, and I still remember all the pursuiters. I still remember Brad McGee, because you don't get him a lot, and when you do get him, you got to make it count. And I remember him saying, "So the last one was slower, the one before was faster, and you want me to do 2 more trials?" He's like, "I'm torched, dude. Like, these trials are hard. They take a lot out of you." But it's a great point. So then in the lead up to London, there was some really interesting opportunities to work with some muscle physiologists, and we started to get very, very interested in single leg work and single leg cycling and single leg resistance training. And it had been around, but it kind of was coming and going and coming and going. So we were playing with counterbalance weights, and we were playing around with the deficit between if you like squat as hard as you can with 2 legs, or you squat as much as you can with 1 leg. If you split a 2-legged squat, you'd think that's what you get with 1 leg, but you don't. You always get more. And the same with fatigue resistance. If you pedal with 1 leg until you reach failure, you always go way more than you do with 2 legs and divide by 2, which is really interesting. And part of it's because you got, neural drive. You've also got all this, for the aerobic side of it, you've got all this blood. And now you're not sending it to that leg, you're just sending everything to that leg. You get this hyperperfusion model. And so that became really interesting. And the other thing that was happening is analytics was getting really exciting. And so there was this we started to get really into matchups, like how would Anna Mears and Victoria Pendleton do battle, or, really specific matchups on this course. If the Americans do this, or if the Belgians do this, then what would you do? And lots of what ifs and scenarios. It was called Project Know Thy Enemy. And it became a really big part of, like, not just getting fit and hoping to win, but to doing lots of scouting on your opposition and lots of scouting on the course. I think Billy talked about all the course profiling. Usually when you're doing course profiling, it's not just know the course. It's like, this is when so-and-so is going to go. This is when Cancellara is going to hit it. This is when, and everybody's thinking through all of these mental scenarios, which is really cool. And we bring in Air Force fighter pilots, which are great because they do lots of these. When they go like this, these are dog fights, and they're like, coming in from top 4G, you go under, I go up. And they do all these kind of scenarios. And what would I do if this situation came up for me? That little graph on the left over here was basically a model that we used a lot, where we would scan. You can do this with MRI. We'd do it with DEXA. It was a lot easier. We'd work out from the iliac crest down how much muscle mass you had in your glutes and your quads, how much muscle was there. And then what we could do is we could look at your maximum power across 1 second, 5 seconds, 15 seconds, 30 seconds. And the goal or the task was saying, for the muscle you have, how much power can you produce on the bike? They're very linear regressions. And for some people, you're like, you're not going to get any more power than that. You know, when you're talking about some of those juniors at 1500 watts peak sprint, that's phenomenal. That's such a big sprint power. And for some people, they are tapping out. The muscle they have is doing everything you could ever expect, or anything we've ever seen. But then there are situations where you're like, you got all this meat, all this muscle, and you're just weak as piss, mate. What's the problem? You know, it's just like, it's doing nothing for you. It's just doing nothing for you. And so then it's more about activation and innervation versus trying to actually build muscle up for those activities. So then I was off and I got a really interesting opportunity. A coach that I coached Australia and a new group of owners all got together in Philadelphia. And the Philadelphia 76ers said, we've been the worst team forever. Not since Iverson have we won anything. It's terrible. Some new owners, some hedge fund guys, and they came in and they bought the place. And this coach I knew, he came in as a head coach. And he was like, you know how you're always writing grants and trying to get funding? How would you like to work on a project where we give you a credit card and you can buy whatever you want? I was like, that sounds pretty cool at this stage of the game. And so I went to Philadelphia with Brett Brown, Sam Hinkie, who's some of you might know from Stanford. He's a Stanford Business School graduate. Very analytical, very creative. He's the kind of like a Yoda. He'd be like, all the teams are picking apples. Let's get together and grow an orchard. I don't know what that means, but it sounded so good. I was like, this is going to be awesome. So I went to Philadelphia and was there for 4 years. And since then, I haven't really had a chance to talk about cycling. So this could go all night because I really miss it. It's really exciting. So I've been working with basketball players, and then now we've been working a little bit more with Mark and the team with kind of concierge health and wellness and using similar themes to high performance sport, but thinking about it for health and fitness for life. But when I look back on what happened in Australia, for a variety of reasons, the medal count, this is kind of like in the lead up to Atlanta, this is Australia's kind of medal count. Now, on a good year, the US cycling team will probably win that many medals alone. But for Australia, that was a really big deal. And there was something really infectious, and you'll hear me keep reflecting back on this belief theme. Because when you're winning, you start thinking, geez, maybe the sports science is important. And then you win some more. Maybe the sports science is important. And something was happening that I don't think we even really saw, but we would all get rolled out after the Olympics. When we should talk about these projects and the administrators, we had ministers for sports, senior politicians, national level, introducing us, tell them about our funding, how great this is, and how little of Australia, with no people and no talent and no idea, battled it out, you know, and did so well at the Olympic Games. And a lot of people started believing that the Institute of Sport was special and the scientists were special and they were doing special things and they had special coaches and Jesus, must be something exciting down there. The students that I had there, Jim Miller, he moved in to work with Team USA and we would keep in touch a lot. And he'd be like, you got to, when you finish there, you got to write a book. You got to tell me, I think I know what you're doing, but I want to know. And what was probably happening is more of a collective belief effect than any one project that you're like, oh my God, that was revolutionary. So the AIS sits in this central place in Australia. It's not Sydney, it's not Melbourne. It's kind of like, you know, on the East Coast and Central. And it gets a lion's share of the government funding. So a lot of the coach education, a lot of science, all the research, a lot of it happens right there. A lot of camps happen there. For a long time, the athletes would, if they made it, they would go there. They would live there. That's where you would live and train and get supported. So this is part of a lab that I worked in. And again, we'd wax and wane 40 to 60 people, depending on the year and the project and what was going on. And all of the sports would be kind of divided up with these different groups. So we had our little cycling group, but I lived and worked with all the guys that were working with sailing and the ones working in rowing and all the track and field. So it had that kind of collective feel to it. And what I really felt like was this kind of theme that you get so much in healthcare, you get it so much in teaching, you get it so much in sport, where you get a little group of 3 or 4 people, and they're good at what they do. You've got the coach, you got the mechanic, you got the soigneur. They're good. They're really, really good. There's nothing wrong. But you don't have the close proximity and depth with the specialist. And so one of the themes in Australia, one of the kind of value adds was that if a talented athlete is identified and they're motivated, we can't leave, you know, a stone unturned. It's got to be like an F1 team, just everyone's got their role, working together, find out what they need, find out what they're good at, maintain what they're great at, build what they're poor at, and get this sucker moving. There's no time. Everybody work together. And it's really interesting. I don't know what it feels like to be a driver in a Formula One car, but I suspect it feels really good when you have a team of 20 people coming in, everybody's just like doing their thing and off you go. Versus you imagine the 1950s, it's your brother-in-law and his friend, and they're like, does anybody know where the spanner is? And they're just like, they're basically monkeying around with your car for a minute and you're hoping they got it right. And so again, that theme of believing in what's going on. Okay, so now let me take you to the case study. So this was a really interesting case study because for Australian women's cycling, this is how it used to be. It was Bridie O'Donnell is the one that you knew, who's also a doctor from Australia. But you'd probably know a lot of these girls are amazing. I always found the men's camp, I was like, what do you do? Cycling. Okay. What else do you do? Cycling. Is there anything else you like besides cycling? I like rock and roll concerts. You like AC/DC? I was like, yeah, they're good, but is there anything else you want to do? What are you going to do after the Olympics? Cycling. For women, and you guys had the same thing. I don't know what it is about women cyclists. You sit down and do little consults with women. Oh, Tracy, what do you do? I'm a statistician. I'm going into bioinformatics. I'm thinking I'm doing my PhD. I think I'll do my PhD and have a child right before the Olympic Games. You think that's a little tight? I'm like, holy crap, you know, you have medical doctors, veterinary doctors, you have these insanely bright, motivated, capable, time managing superstars, which you don't always find in men's cycling. And it's like, dude, I just want to ride my bike. That's all I want to do is ride my bike. Well, these women, this was really common how women's cycling camps would come. Each state would get to promote some of their best, and they'd come in for these funded AIS camps. And this was like, these were hard-ass camps because they're all very, very competitive girls. So they were competitive in their careers. They were competitive on the bike. And we usually go up to moderate altitude. We do some of it at the IS, take them up into Jindabyne or someplace, and they would just beat the crap out of each other for like 2 weeks. And selectors didn't have to do much. You just were like, wow, you know, Juanita's climbing well. Look at her. You just move. She's incredible. And what would happen is she would earn the respect of everybody in that camp. Selection wasn't that hard because it was pretty much if we did time trials up there, they'd just be like, that girl beat you by 8 minutes over 34. What do you think? She go to Europe and you stay back and work on China? They're like, I got it. I got you. There's no arguing. Really hard camps, not super, super scientific. We tested them. We had ideas, but just hard structured camps. Start easy, manage injuries, let them rip. Okay. And there was an era there that was great. The Commonwealth Games you haven't even heard about. I'd never heard about it. Canada, Australia, New Zealand, they take it really serious. Australia's just 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Like they were just dominant, you know. And you were starting to see medals, you know. Anna was ranked #1 female cyclist in the UCI. She won 2 silver medals at the World Championships. Kathy had won a medal. There were medals happening at an international level, and it felt really exciting for Australian women's cycling. Go get them, okay? Poor Jim Miller, he was just saying someday, and he was right because it all flipped. But then this happened. This was really sad. So I don't know. Did you meet her, or did you ever meet Amy? She came late. She was a rower, a bit like you. Phenomenal. The year after Okay. So there's a race in Germany called Thüringen. It was like a teenager texting. Lost control of her car. They were scouting a course, and just the car overcorrected, and they hit just full on, just the whole team. And in Australia, that's all you got. Those 6 girls, one's in a tree. It's terrible. So Amy was killed instantly. The whole team was just wiped out. So that hit Australia. That hit Australia really, really hard. it was hard on the,
It was after but I had raced her again the year before.
yeah, so you know that, yeah.
They all died?
No,
One.
just Amy, but only one really came back. The rest they were pretty serious injuries, yeah. So then this story here is kind of interesting because we had tested female cyclists during all those other camps. We'd literally written the book on how to test an elite athlete. We published the methodology. We knew about like what kind of aerobic capacity, what kind of body composition, what kind of aerodynamics, what kind of we had an idea of what was required to win at a very high level. A lot of the research that I was getting involved with, I'll be careful not to hit this one twice, but a lot of the research that I was interested and involved with was, what do the best female cyclists in the world look like physiologically? What kind of capabilities and capacities do our women have, and where are the gaps, and how do we close those gaps? So let me try this one more time. So we had a whole series of studies. A doctoral student that was working with me, Tammy Ebert, did a really nice job. She's published a whole series of studies looking at power output demands. A lot of these data we shared with Andy Coggin and the Training Peaks group when they were doing all the profiling for men and women, because it was funny how all the men data just started lining up. And remember, Andy and the guys were like, does anyone study women? It's like, they just forgot about women. And it's like, yeah, there are women data, and we can compile those as well. So the type of work that we would do, I'll see if this one, I'm hitting a gravity storm here. I love this research because we would test a lot of executives and elites, and because they like to ride a lot of the top business guys in Australia, and they bring them to the Institute, and they go, how is that? How is that for a test? They go, that's not bad for a 16-year-old woman. That'd be amazing. Yeah. If you're a 24-year-old woman, it's not so great, because they had no idea how strong some of these women were. Okay, so you did a magic trick. What was it? See if you could. Oh, there we go. So can you go back? Oh no, that's okay. We'll leave that one and we'll just keep going. So I had a couple graphs on just data, power data, but you've seen it all before. We would really do a lot of stuff on maximum mean power, these power curves. How much power could you hold at different durations of time? This is actually from a woman. I pulled it up because I knew Christine would be here. It was a lead up to a world championships, a woman that she raced with. And a lot of it was about how you load, how you start to, change the rhythms of the load, how you try to tune the system based on how they fatigue and recover, how you monitor when they're sick, when they're hurt, how you try not to over-index it, because it's important how you feel. And you never want to talk someone out of winning a medal, because heaven forbid you tell them, oh, it's not looking good, and they could still potentially win. So we were doing a lot of these different themes. Now let's see. Oh, you went to here. There we go. Beijing. Team USA is going great. Australian women's cycling is just coming off a crest. Amy Gillett disaster, and it is weird. It's conservative, it's slow, it's cautious, it's doubtful. It started to be like, let's don't have those hard camps, because sometimes they rain. We can't have girls out there in the rain. What if there's an accident? It was like, everything was like, we can't put them in with men's crits. Those guys are going so fast. Someone's going to get hurt. You got to be careful, got to be careful, got to be careful. They're like, don't we have data? And so we got in this challenging world of always looking at the data. She's got this watts per kg. She's got this percent body fat. She's got this VO2 max. She's got this. She's got that. Her CDA is this. And that's how a team was selected. And that's how the girls would go to Europe. But as you heard from Billy, Europe is a tough spot. You might as well just be plucking guys up and going, hey, you're a great shot in the range. Come with me. You're going to Afghanistan. You'd be awesome. It's not a shooting range. It's a whole different world. And so trying to get young women to have confidence in themselves is really hard to do. It's really hard to do. So then I had a neighbor. He was a Super Hornet pilot. And I was talking to him, and I said, we had a couple conferences and I brought him in to talk, and he would talk about fighter pilots and selecting them. And he's a real Top Gun kind of guy, just not as probably brash and arrogant, but he looks the part. And, he's a fast jet pilot. He's just very, very good at it. And selecting pilots is tricky because they're not so worried about the pilots, but they don't want to wreck any planes. I find that hilarious. They're way too expensive. And so he was saying, maybe I'll get you in and let you see some of the selection courses. He goes, have you ever seen like special forces selection courses, all like the SEALs or any of those? Have you seen them? I said, I see them on TV, but I see a lot of people trying to get a Navy SEAL to come in and beat the crap out of athletes and hoorah, and they leave and everyone's hurt. And I'm not sure it works. He goes, yeah, but go on course. Let me, 2 Commando was having up at Holsworthy a selection course, and he let me go up and watch. And I got to talk to the selectors. And I was really impressed at just how thoughtful they were and how they sequenced everything. And so we started talking about maybe we got to go back. We kind of got to go back to go forward. We need more structured camps that are harder and more demanding, but it needs to be insanely relevant because we need to sell this and get people to believe in it. So we're like, we use the acronym PIERCE, Performance in Relevant Challenging Environments. We are going to make you perform, but it has to be relevant and it has to be challenging. And those that excel will get a chance to go to Europe. And those that don't, they will not give up on them. We'll just say not yet. So that was the general idea. You guys will hear more about psychology tomorrow. But when you start looking at special forces soldiers and you look at all the different ways they profile them psychologically, and you look at elite athletes, you could get inside of Christine's head, you would see things like perseverance, hardiness, intrinsic motivation. They have to be there. You can't do what you did if you weren't that, The people that have none of those are binge watching the Ted Lasso or whatever, just hanging out, And so we knew that there was a lot of shared similarities. We had to respect defense is defense and cycling is cycling. And the trick was to keep the two close but apart. So this is PIERCE, Performance in Relevant Challenging Environments. We go out to all the state institutes, work for me. I'm the National Sports Science Coordinator, so I can say, go give a talk to each one of them. Bring out your best, your very, very best, even those that are kind of on the fringe. We're going to take a look at race qualities, and then we're going to move the camp into kind of aspects of fatigue resistance, where we get to see people's soul and their interest in wanting to stay with it. We want to fatigue them and make it tough and not make it easy, but we don't want to hurt them. So that's really tricky. You got to be very, very compassionate, but very firm. And then we're going to get into group dynamics and get it down to the smallest group of the small group, and literally ask girls, do you want her to go to Europe with you confidentially? There's ways to do it, to make it confidential. If you don't do it confidentially, they look at you and go, I don't know what you're asking, but she's my roommate. What are you doing? And everybody wants to help their friends out a little bit. So this is what a camp would look like. You get a group of women, they all come in, and they started to get a lot of press because it looks like a Survivor TV series, because they get very, very organized. And so the press love these camps. There's lots of haters. You got to be, they're hard to pull off. We'd actually bring commandos in. We bring them in and have them talk to the girls and show the soft side of them, but the firm side of them. And what they do is they had to sign informed consent. We said, this is not the only way to get on the national team. All you have to do is go win nationals or hit a selection event and win it. You're in. But there are supplementary spots wide open, and those will be filled by people that come through this process. And it's just show us what you got. And we're never going to say you can't be an Olympian. We're just going to do the old Carol Dweck thing, which we'll get to. Just not yet. Just not yet. You're just not ready now. There's other people more ready than you. So the coaches are in charge, and we got a lot of coaches that had to be friends and buddy with the athletes. And it's hard to be a buddy, like, I believe in you, you hold them, you nurture them, and then step back next minute and go, if you don't get your shit together, you're off this team. It's a really like, do you love me? Do you hate me? Who are you? So it's a really hard role. So we let them know, when you come in here, you will not be coddled, you will not be babied, you will not, this is you showing us what you have. This is not us, come on, you can go. You keep sticking in there. There's none of that. And then the other thing is, if you get hurt or you get injured, you just go home. It's no big deal. And that's just bad luck happens all around the world. And if it happens, we'll take care of you as best we can. We'll transfer you into very, very good medical care. So that's just the way it is. You just come back for the next one. There's no problem there at all. So only the best prepared will continue. We actually would deselect people in the camps. And this was good because people usually aren't ready to not make a team. And we would practice. We would tell them in a room like this, you're going to walk right through that door. It's going to look just like when we tell you whether you make the Olympic team or not, or world championship team or not. It's going to be the same people in there. They're going to sit in the same places. They're going to look you right in the eye, and they're going to talk like this. And you're probably going to feel like this. You're going to want to cry. You're going to want to blame it on someone else. All these emotions are going through, and that's okay, because we're going to practice this over and over. Because really what you want to get out of this is, what do I need to do if I want to be better? That's what it's all about. So they would go through that, treat it as an educational opportunity. You need to learn all the way through these camps. And the AIS and the coaches will never give up on you. There'll be no favoritism, and nobody's giving up on you. Nobody's going to say, what a waste of time, you shouldn't even be here. So it's entirely open for you to show us what you're capable of doing. The structure of the camps were really rigorous. We would look through, can they perform in the laboratory across all these different types of power generating capabilities? That's just sitting on an earth. Do you have the power in your legs? Then it was like, can you make the bike move fast? Same concept, but now you're out on the road riding flat or riding up a hill or riding around turns. Can you make the bike move? We know you have the power. And then out here, it was all about environments too. Can you make a decision? Do you use the power and the speed you have at the right time? Or are you just kind of lost in it all and need to be directed? And so the idea was to throw all these scenarios towards them. So let's see, getting this. So it would look like this: lab testing, and then move the bike, and then race. So those are the kind of themes throughout the camp. The first selection would come after all this profiling. This kind of profiling looks very much like military. They all line up, they actually get numbers, we don't use names. It was just like, let's keep it clean, let's keep it easy. No one's upset with you, no one's happy with you. It is what it is. We wouldn't do a VO2 max test with everybody going, go, 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 keep it going. We'd line up 5 bikes, they come in waves, boom, all by the same weight. They're on the same protocol. Chum, 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 chum. And when they tap out, they tap out. Dead quiet. Just like in a bike race, when you're going up a hill, all you hear is everybody breathing. And then somebody just goes, poof, gone. And then the other 4 go, yes. And they get stronger. And then it goes, poof, gone. Really interesting and motivational. And when you're done, no drama. Oh, I feel so bad for you. Or, oh my God, you're a rock star. It's just like, right, you're done, you need a drink. Excellent. They'll take you out there. Let's go make sure you're up next for the massage. They'd be treated like a pro cyclist. So then this would be some of the power testing over 5, 15. We have these inertial loaded bikes. So it's like riding a bicycle that responds like your body weight's on it. And they would do a time trial. And this was all in the lab, purely for power and power to weight. Then they would do move the bike on tracks and velodromes and up hills to see how the bike goes. And also there were these technical courses I had to ride through. It's amazing how good some people are at making a bike go fast when it's just straight. And once you put rhythm, turns, drops, and rolls in it, it starts to decouple. So you can really reveal what people are good at or weak at. And then what we would do is we would start to put in challenges, and we named them all, just like in the military. One thing that commandos do a lot is they'll say, does anybody know what happened, in the Kandahar region and this date? And the guys will know, or they don't know. They go, 4 people lost their lives during that patrol. They went on a ridge. They had to cover this much distance. Their packs were this heavy. One guy went down. They had to carry his pack too. That's what we're doing today. So the challenges become tie-ins and stories. So we started creating stories around, the coach would get up there and he'd say, I remember the Hewlett Packard challenge. That's what I was asking Christine, if she'd done it. They just stopped it right before. They would say, or do you remember in the women's Giro, There's a climb there. It's Stelvio. It's beautiful. And the coaches with tears in their eyes would be like, on a beautiful day, the temperature is this. You will see this climb. It'll stretch further than you can imagine. And the climb has this many vertical meters of elevation, 2,700, in 57 meters. And guess what you're going to do today? You are going to climb that much today. That's what you're going to do. And they'd all be like, oh my God. Like, this is as extreme as it gets in cycling. You'll never be asked to climb more than that. So what we'd do is we'd have to go out to a big climb by us. We had nothing that tall. So they would have to do repeats of it. But they would do it very isolated. So you wouldn't know. So they'd send a girl off, and it might be 1 minute or 30 seconds, might be 2 minutes. And then the next girl goes off. And there's people all over watching them, timing them, tracking their splits. They all have power meters on. And it's just this isolating afternoon up in the hills with the parrots are making their sounds, and they're just on their own, just climbing, just doing their climb. God, you learn a lot about people. It's competitive because everybody wants to know where the other one is. And nobody knows who's winning or losing. And they're just climbing. They're just climbing. And it's really fun when you're in a car just driving through them all. It's actually really enjoyable. We would put them in men's crits. That used to be a thing. They did all the time, but everybody took it out because they said it's too dangerous. So actually, there is some criteriums, and we would peruse the course. There's always a guy. And he's a danger to everyone. And so the coaches would go through, and they'd be like, "Is Rick racing tonight?" And they go, he's thinking of it." They go, "No, tell him not. We want our women in." And they would tell guys that are dangerous, "You're not racing that." And guys are like, "Really?" They're like, "Yeah, you're not." Why? What is that? Because, dude, you're a nightmare. You take people down all the time. So they would try to like prune the pack so that they were smarter guys. The only problem we had is a lot of the girls dated guy cyclists, and they would look after their girl. I mean, you could see it happen, and you're like, "I know exactly what you're doing," So, and you would learn a lot about them as well, and it was all about confidence. This was a Hewlett Packard challenge. It was an awesome one with 3 motorbikes, and it all takes off. And it's a big long ride. It goes for 170K. It's got lots of gravel on it, and there are tons of flats on this course. And there's all these, we had mechanics in training, and they would be in the cars, and it's just flat, hand up, next one. And then you could go, if the motorbike thought somebody was too strong, they just go up to them and they go, "You got a rear wheel flat." They're like, "What? It's fine." They go, "No, rear wheel flat, pull over." Like, "Yeah." And so they'd have to pull over, and you'd put the wheel in, and then they go back in, all to make it long and arduous and tantalizingly interesting on who's going to be where. These are fun camps, obviously. And then there's all this other stuff, desired attributes. These are not race attributes, but where is your body pump? How is your bike fit? Things like, do you know how to crash? Have you ever tumbled or rolled or fall? We had the commandos and some judo guys that we had pads, and they'd ride through, and they'd go to push and not push, and then they'd push them, and they'd be rolling into pads, and they'd be telling them not to reach out, don't arch your back, and just trying to get them ready to jump gutters and handle cobbles and just feel good on the bike. And if you go down, you just slide over, get up, grab it, and get going. It's not that big of a deal. So this part was really fun. We even did cooking. This stuff here is really fun. It just got, the first camps were a little simpler, and then it just got more and more exciting. We had people that could speak Italian. They'd pick up the girls. "Hey, buongiorno, come stai?" They just go get lost, and then go out, park the car, get on their phone, and the girls are like, "What the hell's going on?" And then we tell them the time trial's starting in 15 minutes. We would hide a helmet, and they'd go, "I can't find my helmet. I can't find my helmet." And like, what did? And all of the selectors are just watching them, just like you would in a special forces, like, who's going to cry, who's going to melt down, who's going to cope, who's strong, who's a leader. Let's see it. And they'd look up for coaches like, "You've got it." Like, "Dude, I'm not doing anything but watching you. You've got to take care of this." One time they had a flat tire, and we would tell the girls, "It's a flat tire. And your driver, I don't know what he's doing. You guys work it out." And they'd be talking to him, "You got to help us. You got to do that. Are you calling for help?" And the guy would be talking German or something. And the idea was, how long would it take before they go, "Let's change the tire. Let's change it." And so it became a thing, and each camp knew at some stage you're going to have to change the tire in the car. And one girl would make it safe, put your things down, your other things down. The other girls would get together. They changed the tire. They thought it was awesome. One time a guy drove by in front of us. He came back to me and one of the other coaches. There's 3 blokes with clipboards and we're just watching what they're doing. He came back and gave us a serve. He said, "You chauvinistic bastard, you got 3 women, change it, are you?" And we said, hey, it's part of it, it's part of the course. It's all planned for. This is exactly what we're doing. The other thing that you'll love, for those of you that really take pride in your bikes, is that once it got down, this is after the first selection, as part of the second selection, to let them start getting tired now, they brought all the parts for a bike in boxes. And they said, with an instruction manual. And the head team mechanic that worked for Orica Green Edge, he loved this one. It was his favorite challenge. They basically had to build a bike. And it was just spokes and a rim. It was just everything just laid out. And they had to build a bike. And it took days. But they were so proud of themselves. We'd never let them ride it because, but they were so proud of themselves that they could kind of semi-true a wheel. They could put things together, the stem and everything. It was really interesting. So then you would see all these psychological elements. The beginning of the camps were highly, highly structured. Testing. The end was just chaos, They'd wait, just like a race. Wait, sorry, we're at the wrong venue. We're gonna have to go drive over here to pick it up. We tell them we're going to the airport. We actually got the airport people to jump in with us and they take them aside. So I need you to take you in this room, go through your bag. It was just one drama after another, but everything had to be relevant to racing. We used the Dweck mindset questionnaires, lots of head-to-head competition, and lots of relevant situation challenges, okay? Okay, so this is a good place for a time check. So that's right at 5. So what I want to do is I just want to get to what the girls said about it. So let me see. These are just pictures, structure, chaos. The silent running is so cool. No feedback. Nobody knows where they're at. And they'd say, "How did I go?" And you just look at them and go, "Did you give your best? You gave your best. That's all you got." Like, yeah, but who's winning? Like, where am I? And you go, you just give your best, right? That's all you got to do. It was great. That's Carol. She actually came over to Australia. She's a Stanford girl, as many of you will know. She's like super, super expensive, but she was working on a corporate project. We had a connection, so she came by and got to take a little look at what we were doing and did a little seminar for the coaches, which was really nice. They would ask them all these different questions, which were fun and exciting. Who are you? What makes you interesting? Why will you get through this camp? This is the part that was really interesting. This was the rate your mate, where you basically get a tick box and you say, of all the girls you're with, because now it's a smaller group, you've gone from 30 down to maybe 10 or 12, who do you think is ready to race in Europe? And they are good. They were as good as the selectors a lot of times because it was totally confidential. Just to check on a box, put them in, mix them all up, and nobody was ever tell who they voted for. And the writing was on the wall who was not ready to go to Europe. So there is a video, but I think we're okay to leave it. I can give you guys, I'll send out a YouTube. There's a couple videos, but let's just finish with this one. Gracie was one of the kind of stars of this camp process. So she's a mountain biker and 2 girls dropped out. They said they weren't able to come to the camp. So we had 2 extra slots. So we said, who should we fill it with? And one of the local ACT coaches said, there's this mountain biker, Gracie. She's new. She's relatively new to cycle, but she's strong and you'll love her attitude. Can we get her in? I was like, she's really early stage. People are going to get upset because, some girls, they train and prepare for years. And now they find out a girl that's just been doing this for, a couple of years gets in. Plus, don't tell anyone she's a mountain biker. Like those girls are kind of like, a mountain biker. They're not worthy of funding. So they let her in. And she was amazing. She was quiet, she was smart, she was fit, and she just kept winning and winning and winning. You could see the girls polarize against her a little bit at the beginning, like, oh, well, wait till we get on the road. And then it was like, boom. It was like, oh, well, wait till she gets on gravel. And it was like, I love gravel. And it was like, oh, well, well, wait till she gets a little sleep deprived. She'll be the first to cry. And then they were all crying. And she's like, it's all right. Come on, let's go. You can use my helmet. She was amazing. So she said it was clear for me at the start, they did not want to be me. They did not want to push us out of the sport. They wanted to encourage us to show our passion, our fire, and our ability to grow and learn from the experience. This is what I value most coming out of the camp. I did well physically, but my biggest win was finding out that I was a capable team player and even a leader. It's funny how leadership goes. Competence, when people are confident and competent, and they start deciding this is what we need to do to survive, people follow, don't they? If you have doubt in yourself, you will follow the person that has confidence. She did great. She had a great career, multiple Olympiad now. She's performed, very well in a number of different areas. So the take-home message was, the first part was to show you there were a lot of sports science themes. There were a lot of really interesting projects, but the science of it would just take us so far. It was really starting to put it all into context that made it a lot more interesting. And I think we started to, all of us, all the scientists, we enjoyed these camps. We got lots of data out of it, but we just enjoyed the comprehensive nature of the whole thing. So I think I'll leave it there. Yep.